it's actually extraordinary, isn't it, that he now infects, is the word I want. He infects absolutely everything. Feels like a different age, a different epoch, when people who weren't very well informed or very bright or possibly both would use Trump derangement syndrome as an insult or a pejorative because they hadn't grasped how completely depraved, morally bankrupt, politically corrupt he was. But even when the British Prime Minister visits China on a trip that is in the national interest in one way and morally repugnant in another, even when the British Prime Minister visits China, such is the nature of news that we perhaps inevitably end up leading the report of the story with a reference to what Donald Trump has said about it. You know, in those science fiction films, when humans are turned into mutants and the clever scientists finally get the DNA on the computer screen or something like that, and it's as if a sort of raspberry ripple effect starts running through our genetic makeup that explains the mutation, whether it's sort of emanated from a meteorite that landed in the middle of a desert after jetting in from outer space, whatever it is that is turning human beings mad. What is it in Day of the Triffids? Is it something in the sky? Don't at me. Well, you can at me actually, but don't ring me. Do you know what I mean? And you finally get it up on the computer screen and it's infecting every part of us. I watched the latest 28 Days Later film the other day. My God, that is such an extraordinary film. It really is. But it's about, no spoilers, I don't think. It's about zombies and it's about the way in which... well, it's not about that, but all zombie films essentially have a central premise by which we become, technical term coming up, zombified. And it involves infiltration of every corner of our being. And Donald Trump is doing that now. Donald Trump is the infection. And he is now reaching into, because of the power and the nature of his office as President of the United States, and because of the unique depravity of his character, he is now reaching into every aspect of our existence. It's absolutely insane. I said to you yesterday, and I stand by it today, I wasn't sure I would. I thought I might be enjoying a sort of first flush syndrome. It's incredibly liberating to let go of hope. It's incredibly liberating to stop thinking he'll come good in the end, or that normal circumstances will be resumed, or that this is America. I think there's an actual piece in the Washington Post, more or less under the headline of America just doesn't do fascism. Please stop using that word. And you're like, you're so nearly there. You're so nearly there. We all thought America didn't do fascism, but it does, and it is. Hideous comments now about the murdered nurse, Alex Pretty, that Donald Trump has shared on social media. We may get onto that in a moment. They're not zombies. Paul is on form already this morning. They're not zombies, James. They are infected. Zombies have to be dead first. Did you know that, Keith? Did anybody else? Is Paul right even? I mean, is Paul providing us with fake news? I don't know. But anyway, they are infected. You're absolutely right. And it is every corner of the body politic, really, on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond, has now been infected by him. So he slags off Keir Starmer for visiting China, and he is visiting China himself in April. You can't make this stuff up. He has called Alex Pretty an insurrectionist, a possible insurrectionist, as if that were a bad thing, which it can't be, because actual insurrectionists got pardoned and praised by Donald Trump within 10 minutes of him getting back into the White House. And it speaks, perhaps, it's not often I put Donald Trump and our esteemed colleague Henry Riley in the same space, but it perhaps speaks also, what I'm about to ask you, to Henry's experiences in Chinatown in this country, in this city indeed, in London a moment ago, that you heard on the End of Nick's show, where you wonder why you don't have a stronger opinion about things, and you realise that it's because you don't know enough. So, I mean, how else are you going to report Keir Starmer's visit to China except by saying Donald Trump has slagged it off? Newspapers are a little better, but they, of course, went to the presses before Donald Trump stuck his oar in. What would happen if we tried not to talk about him, except when he does think, no, you can't do that because he does what he said he was going to do. All of the people who said, don't worry about what he says, focus on what he does, have gone incredibly quiet. Which reminds me, I think it's Dick Littlejohn Day again today, isn't it, in the Daily Mail? I have to wait and see what he's had to say about his absolute political hero, who he wishes was running this country, now that he is essentially libelling murdered nurses and encouraging goon squads and snatch squads on the streets of America. I can't wait to see what the top columnist in Britain's top newspaper has got to say about his former political hero. The sackcloth and ashes must have been on order. Don't let me forget that, actually. I'll have a look later, because that's where I want to start today. It is nearly 10 minutes past 10, and I don't know enough about China to have a strong opinion about Keir Starmer's visit. I have mentioned to you a few times that Robin Cook was the last British politician I can remember using the words ethical and foreign policy in the same sentence. A foreign secretary who resigned over foreign policy. I don't know if we're ever going to return to those days. It may have been an unachievable dream even then, but at least people still dreamt it. Pragmatism is a very dangerous word, isn't it? It excuses a multitude of sins. He's very pragmatic, which often means, well, he's dancing with the devil because he thinks that he has to. Or, he is behaving in a way that is morally questionable but intellectually justifiable. If we didn't trade with bad people, who would we be left to trade with at all? A question that assumes a peculiar resonance when you remember that we, as a country, voted to remove ourselves from the largest trading bloc on the planet, the largest trading bloc in the history of humanity. We voted to remove ourselves from that, and the people that encouraged us to do so are in some cases, I was looking at the front page of the Daily Mail, are in some cases attacking Keir Starmer for trying to build trading ties with all that's left. China, I think, in the top 5 countries when it comes to UK trade already, and it usually goes up a notch if you start seeing European Union countries as individual states, which you probably shouldn't do, as opposed to a single trading bloc. So I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb this morning. It's not what you might call a traditional phone-in, but I am fully conscious of the fact that I can't do this every day. If I came on air every day and said, I don't know enough about this subject to have a strong opinion, how long would it be before they yanked me off air? And it would make a complete mockery of me getting paid to do my job. What is it that you? What is it that you're there for? Well, I go on air and I admit that I'm stupid, and everybody rings in to tell me stuff I didn't know before. I like that. They're sometimes my favourite phone-ins, but I can't do it on every subject, and I'm not sure I've ever done it on a subject quite as big as this. Things I know about China. I mean, it is a regime where a radio program like this would reach Chinese ears with absolute incomprehension. He's what? He's on... everyone can listen to him, and he just slagged off the leader. Yeah. Everyone can listen to him, and he routinely takes the mickey out of politicians from all parties. Well, there's only one party, of course, in China, but he takes... Well, yes, he does. And he hasn't been disappeared. He hasn't been locked up. He hasn't... Wow. That first point there is almost inconceivable. And I think when I was young and naive... Sorry, when I was younger and naiver, I probably might have started thumping my undergraduate folders and shouting about how we should never do business with a regime like that. And then you remember Tiananmen Square, and you sort of remember thinking, yeah, maybe we should never be doing business with a country like that. And I remember the motorcade making its way up the M4 when the King of Saudi Arabia came to visit. Countries we do business with where you still are not allowed to be gay. Ethical foreign policy. What else do I know about China? I know that they think centuries ahead. Frank knows this too. He's in Darwin in Lancashire and says, my old history teacher always said, beware of the Chinese. They plan years and years into the future. I was 13 years old at the time, James, and I'm now in my mid-70s. And when you look at the roads and bridges policies in on the African continent, you will see that China has got its... the tentacle sounds like a negative, but Chinese interests now extend not only right across the continent, but also across the centuries. Because Frank's old teacher was right. They are thinking generations ahead. They are not thinking it's almost the polar opposite of electoral cycle-dominated politics. The fact that I'm even talking about things in the UK that can be reversed tomorrow would also, I think, reach Chinese ears as close to anathema. They did what? They voted to come out of the biggest trading bloc in the world. Are they all mad? Well, not all, but 52%. But don't worry, because when normality is resumed and when good sense returns, we can actually all vote to go back in again. And we probably won't even need to vote, because by the time it happens, it'll be so obvious that it has to, that all the talk of referendums and the like will be moot. That, sadly, that day is still a long way off, as you can tell by just looking at the opinion polls. So, things I know about China. You can't say anything against the government if you live there. The plan, for want of a better word, is immense and epochal. It's imperial in concept. We talk about the Roman Empire. We talk about the British Empire, and we think about them flaring brightly but briefly. Chinese dominance of the globe is a work in progress. I think did I read this week that African countries are now paying more back to China in loan repayments than they are receiving in loans. I don't know what the significance of that is, but it struck me at the time as fairly important. So African countries are mortgaged to the hilt, if you like, and they're paying more back to Chinese lenders, which are going to be the Chinese government ultimately, than they are now receiving. And it doesn't strike me as a completed job, the regeneration of the African continent. So I don't know enough to have a strong... I certainly don't know enough to know whether or not Keir Starmer should or should not have gone to China. I'm very sad that he hasn't secured the release of Jimmy Lai. But given his background in human rights and law, I presume I will give him the benefit of the doubt and presume that he tried. And when there comes a point when you realise it's not going to happen, do you pack everything up and go home? Or do you, wait for it, do you employ, altogether now, pragmatism? Do you employ pragmatism rather than a sort of moral absolutism? But you employ I wish that we had secured Jimmy's release, but we couldn't. And there's no way I could let that failure or that refusal on the part of Xi Jinping stymie the progress that we have made in various areas. If Xi Jinping visits this country, as was mooted yesterday, I think Jimmy Lai's case, please God he's still alive, would become even more acute. But in the moment that we're currently discussing, we are cozying up to China. And I should be asking you why we should or shouldn't. But I can't really do that without admitting to you that I don't know enough. I sense, well, I've done it, haven't I? I've told you what's going on without actually intending to. What is the relationship between pragmatism and principle? It is obviously a country built on principles that we are repulsed by. But pragmatism demands that we do business with people we don't like. Now, how many of us still use Amazon, despite the fact that Jeff Bezos is rapidly turning into a sort of medieval noble? I don't know enough to have an opinion that I am confident of. That's the point, I think. That's the problem. And I'm not going to end up with an opinion that I would furiously defend, like my conviction that Donald Trump is depraved or that Brexit was a stupid thing to do or that Boris Johnson should never have been allowed anywhere near the reins of power. Ditto Liz Truss, of course. Ditto Nigel Farage. I'm not going to end up with an opinion that is as clear and as evidence-based as those, but I'd like to have a slightly better opinion than I have now. I really would. But I can't until you help me out a bit. So, Why? Two questions, really simple in essence, but presumably quite complicated in solution. Why do we know so little about China? 03456060973. Off the top of my head, look at the difference between Trump and Xi Jinping. Trump's he could almost break wind and lead the 10 o'clock news on the BBC. Xi Jinping, I don't want to use the word inscrutable because it's borderline racial stereotype, isn't it? But I know nothing about any of these people. I know more about Donald Trump than I would want to know in a million lifetimes. But why do we know so little about China? It can't be a coincidence. So how does that closure of communication work? If you think you're qualified to answer the question, why would nobody talk to Henry when he was wandering around Chinatown with his microphone? Is it a question of character or is it a question of fear? I honestly don't know. But where all of these questions lead is to should we be doing business? Should we be cozying up to this regime? And that is the ultimate battle between pragmatism and principle. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 03456060973. Why do we know so little about China? And should we be cozying up to this regime?